The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 22. But why won't he let us go with you? Tychus demanded. Tango tried to not roll her eyes. It wasn't easy. The kid wasn't whining exactly, but it was getting damn close. Because he loves you, that's why, she explained. He doesn't want to see you get hurt. You said your last mission was a piece of pie? Chechla chimed in after a moment's thought. Surely my brother and I coming along wouldn't be that large of a burden. A piece of cake, Tango sighed. Even after all these years, there were still nuances the kids missed. And just because the last mission was a breeze doesn't mean the next one will be. But you could talk to him, yes? Tychus pressed. You could get him to see our side. Oh, I could talk to him all right, she snorted. But there is absolutely nothing I could say that would change his mind on this one. Tango shook her head. The twins were being even more stubborn than usual. You've got to understand why he's so protective of you two, right? She asked. How many times have the three of you sat in front of your mother's memorial stone? Our mother's death was a long time ago, Chechla pointed out. Not to him, she said softly. Tango looked at the two young Sauritars and sighed. Have either of you ever talked with your father about his experiences during the wars? The twins looked at each other for a moment before shaking their heads. He does not like to speak of it, Tychus said at last. Yeah, no kidding. The human considered her options for a moment and then shrugged. You want to know why he's so protective of you? I'll tell you why, on the condition you never tell your dad. I want your word on that. She gave them both a stern look. The pair nodded their heads. We promise, they said in unison. Tango repressed a shudder. It was downright eerie when they did that. Your father never wanted to be a soldier. Hell, no Sauritar had even held a weapon in 10 millennia, not until the Konheim came along, she explained. He got drafted like thousands of others and run through a basic that was almost as short as yours, and then they threw him straight into combat. The twins listened with rapt attention as she recounted the tale. He watched half his unit get mowed down in the first 5 minutes. That was on Uzonks, where he got his first medal. She turned to Tychist, the very same one he gave to you, as it happens. The lad nodded as she continued. He distinguished himself, though. Lynn used to tell me that story, God rest his soul, she said reverently, as the twins bowed their heads. Your father single-handedly took out an anti-air platform that was knocking friendly shuttles out of the sky. He saved hundreds of lives that day, maybe more. She smiled and shook her head. It wasn't until later that we met, and truth be told, I barely noticed him. Just another Sauritor grunt, and given the odds, he'd probably be dead in a week. That's how bad it was. She chuckled at that. But he's tougher than he looks, your dad. When the Navy got chased out of the system, his unit was bombarded from orbit. Tango sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. It was a goddamn bloodbath. Less than 1 in 10 survived. Your father dragged Lynn for kilometers across the blasted landscape, until the ropes he'd fashioned cut into his flesh, until he was delirious with dehydration. But he never stopped moving, not until help finally arrived. The children's eyes grew wider as they pictured the scene, but she wasn't done with them yet. He got shot twice on Zaronk, by the Dayaksh Jiaj Guyaz himself, as it turned out, and yet he spared his life, even though he had him in his sights. Doing that pretty much ended the war. Tango shrugged. The next one, though, that was what shattered him. Lynn died saving his life on Gok. He'd snuck away from your mother without saying goodbye, afraid she'd disapprove of his latest mad scheme. And they never spoke again. They never got the chance. Chugaz Aiden's forces blew up your mom's ship with all hands, and he still blames himself for that. She shook her head sadly. He couldn't even bury her. One could have heard a pin drop as Tango got a faraway look in her eyes. After that, I think he wanted to die. His last op, calling it a suicide mission, would be charitable. I should know, seeing how I was right there with him. We gunned our way through the flagship, searching for the man responsible for your mother's death, only to have him slip through our fingers. She shook her head sadly. We almost lost your dad right there. I managed to drag him into an escape pod after his suit breached, pumped him full of drugs and shocked his heart a dozen times before he finally came back. She sighed once more and looked back at the twins. And even now, I'm not entirely sure he's ever forgiven me for not just letting him die. The kids could only stare at her in stunned silence. So you just think about that. Think about what all that does to someone, especially someone who's as gentle a soul as your father. Tango smiled at them, but it was bittersweet. He loves you both more than anything, but he's also been through hell. And the very last thing he wants is for either of you to ever experience what he did. The trio sat in silence as they considered that, until finally Tychist spoke up. "Thank you for telling us this, Tango," he said at last. "But may I ask you a question?" "Certainly," she said. The twins shared another look. She'd never seen actual telepathy in her life, but these two came awful close. "The Tetrarchy. We are all in grave danger, are we not?" "Yeah, we are," she agreed solemnly. "As bad as I've ever seen." Chechla picked up the thread without missing a beat. "Then, is it not the duty of every one of us to do all we can? To save what we can?" she asked quietly. "My brother and I have no desire to cause our father any more pain, but neither can we stand by and let others carry the burden. It would be wrong." Tango groaned and cast her eyes heavenward. "Lord, give me strength," she muttered before glancing over at Tychist. "I don't need to ask if you agree with your sister, do I?" "No, you do not," he acknowledged. "Thought so." Tango sighed, shaking her head. "All right," she said at last. "I withdraw my objection." The pair smiled with joy, only to have those feelings immediately dashed. "But," she continued, raising a finger, "I won't intercede on your behalf either. If you want to fight, you'll have to convince him yourself." They glanced at one another, and then nodded once more. "We understand," Tychist agreed. "Just don't be surprised when he shoots you down," she countered. "It won't matter how good your argument is, he'll still deny your request. Because buried deep in that place of the brain where planning happens, the thought of something happening to either of you flat out terrifies him." Admiral Matavosian could only shake his head in disbelief as he looked over the latest reports. "Marshal, I apologize for not getting here sooner, but given the condition my fleet was in..." His voice trailed off before he tried once again. "What are your orders, ma'am?" "We've lost containment," Fujimoto said grimly. "The infected Ronin are spreading, and we're using every ship we have to track them down. But we're fighting an uphill battle. They're starting to hit the other worlds, and at this point..." She sighed unhappily. "I'm almost tempted to point you at the nearest planet, Ronin or no, and order you to blast it down to the bedrock." "A bit counterproductive, don't you think?" he asked carefully. Yes, obviously those aren't my orders," she snapped. "There's simply too much ground to cover for you to keep your fleet intact, Admiral, so my orders are to break down into individual squadrons and tell them to go hunting." "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "You, on the other hand," the Field Marshal continued, "are to take a squadron and head to Thatteen. General Nasat is already there, and he has some crazy notion about how to fix the Ronin. I want you to confer with him, assess the situation, and determine if he's really onto something. If so, assist any way you can. If not," her eyes bored into his, "if he is unable to break the infected Ronin free from their spell, you are to begin implementing Operation Blackout immediately, starting with Thatteen." Admiral Matavosian was quiet for several moments. "So, it's come down to this then," he said at last. "It has," Fujimoto replied in funereal tones. "The pandemic is out of control, Admiral. I'm not certain at this point if we can stop it, even with Blackout. Even under the best-case scenario we have to date, we're projecting losing 2/3 of the Tetrarchy before it burns itself out." "Damn it," he whispered. Staring at the projection, there was one question he needed answered. "And Earth?" he asked. "So far, Earth has been far enough out of the firing line that we've been spared from the worst of the Ronin plague," she informed him, "which is why the Prime Minister sent the bulk of Earth force to assist the Konim. Not my idea, by the way," she said, somewhat testily. "I wanted to keep those ships close at hand, but I was overruled." "I understand," he nodded. "I'll pass on your orders immediately." "Good. The sooner the better." Suddenly the Field Marshal looked decades older. "Because mark my words, if we don't stop this now, here, you can kiss Earth goodbye. And if Leandra thinks I'll sit idly by and let that happen, The look in her eyes grew positively feral. And then she doesn't know me at all. The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 23. Governor General Vian Sabolchi waited impatiently as the shuttle started touching down on Barsoom Field, in the Chryse Planitia region of Mars. There'd been some rather heated debate regarding the Konhim refugees, the biggest being where the hell they were going to put them. He'd barely put down the phone before the local leaders started tramping in, every one of them demanding he send the children somewhere else. Anywhere else? It was a political nightmare, and one he would have gladly handed off to some lesser functionary. Except the Prime Minister had specifically dumped this mess in his lap. Pawning it off on the Junior Undersecretary of Social Services might be the expedient course of action, but he knew Leandra Singh all too well. In her mind, it would be a clear sign he wasn't up to the challenge, which would mean being handed a pink slip and shown the door. Some days it just didn't pay to get out of bed. About the only region on Earth that didn't have some rather large craters where cities used to be, thanks to the Konhim, was Antarctica. And given the lack of infrastructure, not to mention the optics of exiling the kids off to the one place on the planet actually worse than Siberia, the idea was quickly shelved. Next was Luna, and since the entire population lived either below the surface in carved-out tunnels or under domes, they'd be packed in like sardines. Earth's moon simply wasn't up to the challenge of absorbing that many refugees that quickly, even with support from the homeworld. So, strike two. Which brought him to Mars. The red planet hadn't suffered during the previous war, so there wasn't the simmering resentment found on Earth. With the centuries of terraforming, it was almost as lush as mankind's original habitat, with the added bonus of lower gravity. It took a good deal of old-fashioned horse trading with the Martian governor to work out the details, not the least of which being that she wouldn't be within 1,000 kilometers of Barsoom when the refugees arrived. That way, if public sentiment turned against them, she could place the blame squarely on Sabolchi himself and wash her hands of the entire affair. Politics. Crews were still hard at work constructing the necessary facilities, but based on their latest estimates, they should hopefully manage to stay one step ahead. A few companies had found their wheels sufficiently greased to accomplish that minor miracle. But hey, that's what contingency funds were for. There'd been even more debate on how to greet the refugees once they arrived. Were it up to him, he would have kept it as low-key as possible. So much so that he would have read about it on page 14 of next week's intelligence summary. But that would have looked like he was trying to distance himself from a charitable and diplomatic event. The fact that he was attempting to do exactly that didn't help at all. So they managed to keep most of the press out of the loop, downplaying it as much as they could. There wouldn't be any speeches, thank God. He could just imagine how that would look when the media got done with it. Just a brief and simple welcome before he handed the whole mess off to the professionals. With any luck, he'd be home in time for dinner. The vehicles were standing by to take the kids to actually, they were still debating the name. Internment camp was shot down almost immediately, and while there were a few wags holding out for vacation resort, the smart money was temporary settlement facilities. Vague, innocuous, and it had the lovely word temporary in it, all specifically designed to smooth ruffled feathers. As the lead shuttle's ramp dropped, Sabolchi and his entourage moved forward to greet them. A lone Konhim female stepped off the ramp, her eyes squinting in the faint Martian daylight, squaring her shoulders as she spotted the incoming humans. Vian plastered his most sincere fake politician smile on his face and held out his hand. Greetings. I am Governor General Sabolchi, and on behalf of my people, allow me to welcome you to Mars. The Konhim stared curiously at his outstretched hand, before tentatively copying the gesture. Sabolchi grasped it gently, not wanting to startle her, and gave it the long-approved 3 up-and-down jerks. She seemed confused by it all, but gave him what appeared to be some sort of shrug, as if to say, I am in a strange land, and must therefore put up with the odd customs of the natives, before replying to his greeting, after deciding which hand to use. I am Dr. Chishad Bzukoj, in charge of this group, she said as she looked around the spaceport. Unless they are necessary, I would wish to request those not needed for the actual transfer to stand clear. Sabolchi stared at her in confusion. I'm afraid I don't understand, he said, his smile faltering. She seemed to deflate slightly. The journey, it has not been an easy one, she said quietly. Many of the children are frightened, fearing the worst. Anything that will ease the tension would be most appreciated. Of course, he nodded, now that he was on familiar footing again. He turned to his assistant and made shooing gestures as she and the others quickly scurried away. The Konhim doctor sighed in relief. I thank you, she told him. If you will give me a moment, I will bring them out. She turned and retreated into the shuttle, leaving him standing there feeling faintly ridiculous. Several minutes went by, with Vienne feeling like a bigger and bigger idiot, before the doctor re-emerged from the shadows, bearing a toddler-sized Konhim in her arms. She stepped out into the light, motioning for others to follow as she descended the ramp. The human governor plastered the smile back on, wanting to look his best for the distant cameras when the young Konhim refugees first set foot on Mars. The smile died a gruesome death as they finally appeared. They clung together in small groups, the smaller ones clutching desperately at the older children, who themselves could not have yet been in their teens. Their eyes darted in every direction, wary of even the slightest hint of danger, each of them focusing on him as if he were a cobra ready to strike. He blinked in surprise before making a placating gesture with his hands as he stepped back, giving the children space. Dr. Bzukoj urged them forward, yet each step was tentative, as if they feared the ground would give way beneath their very feet. More groups emerged, with the oldest clenching tightly the knives at their waists, mere babes forced to act as protectors for those far too young to defend themselves. There was a defiant fierceness in those eyes, as they stood ready to do battle to protect their charges, but it was a fragile bravado, destined to shatter like glass in the face of real opposition. Those old enough to stand on their own carried infants strapped to their chests, making cooing sounds in an attempt to quiet them as they cried and sobbed, and far too many of the youthful nannies were shedding tears of their own. The youngest, able to walk without assistance, tottered along beside them, their grubby hands gripping tightly a free arm or leg, unwilling to risk even for an instant the loss of physical contact. My God, he whispered, before turning to the doctor. Are they all like this? Most, yes, Xishad confirmed, as they lead the procession towards the waiting vehicles. Being taken from their families, thrust among strangers, knowing those left behind are... Her words trailed off into silence as she forced a professional mask onto her face. As I said, it has not been an easy journey. Vienne looked away, unsure of his own expression, looking back at the line of refugees following them. Where are the teenagers? He asked. Are they still on board? Teenagers, the doctor said in confusion. Yes, the adolescents, he explained. The young adults. This time, it was the doctor's turn to look away. Once physically mature, a Konhim is considered to be an adult. Those you described stayed behind to fight the enemy. Governor Sobolchi skidded to a halt. Wait, you left them to die? He said in disbelief. The doctor's calm demeanor transformed in a heartbeat. She snarled at him, her free hands clenching into fists. Do you think we wished this? She snapped. Even if we had room for the adolescents, none would have allowed themselves to be shipped away like mewling infants, not when there was an enemy to face. My people are warriors, Governor. From the age we are first able to hold a blade. Even those you see here would have fought, had cooler heads not prevailed. She sighed heavily as the fire went out of her eyes. It was not so long ago the leaders of Zeus chose death, rather than surrender to the Tetrarchy, she said quietly, even for their own children. Perhaps this is what you call progress. She shook her head before raising her chin defiantly. Had I been allowed, I too would have stayed behind, but someone was needed to look after the children. We drew lots to choose, and I lost. The Konhim doctor gave him a glance that could have frozen helium. But then I would not expect you to understand. You are an alien. For the first time in a very long time, the politician's ready answer died in Vienne's throat. We were a lot like you once, he said at last. We fought war after war amongst ourselves, always vowing to do better the next time. He sighed and shrugged his shoulders. But when the next time came, we'd start all over again, killing each other like it was our favorite pastime. Hell, maybe it was. Dr. Bazukoj looked curiously at him, her face all but unreadable. I won't lie to you. A lot of people aren't thrilled that you're here, Shabolchi continued, before giving her a wry smirk. I wasn't, truth be told. But now? He took another long look at the line of children snaking their way to the trucks. We'll look after you, he said softly. I swear it.